So there's the parable. There's the occasion in Luke 15. Where does this parable, this on Luke 15, opens up with Jesus doing what? What's Jesus doing in Luke 15, verse 1? He's teaching, right? He's with those sinners and tax collectors again. He's up to his old antics. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 15, verse 24, He said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He was attending to the lost sheep. He was doing what he was sent to do. And what was the response? People looking at Jesus. Here's this person who's supposed to be a rabbi or a teacher. And no respected rabbi or teacher would be seen with the tax collectors or the sinners. But what is Jesus doing? He's right there in the middle of them, isn't he? Right there in the middle of them. Eating with them. On other occasions, can we think of other times where Jesus was with those who were marginalized, those who were outcasts? Zacchaeus? Look in Luke 19. Luke 19. Luke 19, verse 1. He entered into Jericho, and passing through, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. What did Zacchaeus want to do? Want to see him, right? Climb up in that tree. Climbed up in that tree to see Jesus. And what was the response? What did Jesus say was going to happen that day? I'm going to your house. He was a chief tax collector, which meant that he was in charge of an area. This city of passing through, entered into Jericho. Jericho was a city that was a Levitical city. In that time, it was a rich city, so he was a wealthy man. Yes, ma'am.
Most rich people and tax collectors and people like that don't really want anything to do with Jesus. I almost think he was curious, but it just turned out for the best for him.
Yeah. Out of all those people that were there, who did Jesus pick out? Zacchaeus, the one up in the tree. He must have really wanted to see him if he was going to go through that effort, right? Yeah, he was a small guy. He was probably used to that, right? So he wanted to see Jesus. So here's an occasion. Look in Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. Verses 36 and following through the end of the chapter. Who are we talking about in Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 36? Who was it? Who was the one that was marginalized? Who was the outcast here? The woman who was a sinner from the city, right? What was she doing? Washing his feet. She was the one with the alabaster box. And what was her response? Yeah, verse 44, then he turning toward the woman, he said to him, do you see this woman? I entered into your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. That's Jesus. Here's somebody who she knew would care for her when nobody else would. How did she know that? She knew it because of how he interacted with people, right? Look in Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, beginning of verse 27. Who are we talking about? Matthew, Levi, a tax collector, named among the 12. You weren't alone. You weren't alone, and I think still aren't. But let's get into that. Tax collectors, just going into a background of what's going on, tax collectors or publicans were hated among the people. Nobody liked them. And you have that reading there, if a little bit of light reading before you go to bed tonight, about Pharisees. Just under, not Pharisees, but I want to get to about the publicans. I'm getting ahead of myself. But in the second column on the right, towards the bottom, Theocritus considered the bear and the lion to be the most cruel among the beasts in the wilderness, and among the beasts of the city, the publican and the parasite. So the publican and the parasite were the most cruel among in the cities, according to the Romans. In addition to their other faults, accordingly, the publicans of the New Testament were regarded as traitors, apostates, defiled by their frequent interactions with the heathen, willing to be tools of the oppressor, that being Rome, because they were implored by Rome to collect Roman taxation. They were classed as sinners, harlots, and heathens. So they were the bottom of the barrel. They turned against their people, worked for the oppressing nation of Rome, and collected taxes for them. And not only the taxes, but they were known for collecting more than was actually levied against them. Even in the time of Paul and of Christ, there were those who did not want to pay those certain duty. Some of the taxes they didn't mind paying, but there were certain taxes, the duty taxes, as far as being an oppressed nation, they didn't want to pay because they didn't want the money going to anywhere other than what they felt was right. And so even in the time of Christ, there were those who did not want to pay that tax. And that's why it was very important when Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, and render unto God's that which is God's." Even in the time of Christ, they didn't want to pay the taxes, and I don't think that's really changed. It still is, man. It's that thing, right? But they were not highly regarded people. They weren't the people that the average good, upstanding, moral citizen hung out with. But Jesus, the one who came to revolutionize their thinking about what was right, hung out with these people.
He even chose one of them to be one of his 12 apostles.
Yes, his close and trusted people. According to the Talmud, there were 3 classes of people that one did not have to keep promises to: thieves, murderers, and tax collectors. And the Talmud is a record of Jewish practices that they regarded as binding as the Bible itself. Now let's look at the Pharisees in stark contrast. The Pharisees were those who separated themselves after the order of Levitical purification. They were not Levites. They were not regarded or had to purify themselves in this manner, but they wanted to be righteous and holy, so they decided that they would purify themselves according to Levitical tradition. And they set aside for themselves their own standards of purification that went beyond the law, and they had 4 levels of purification. And I will let you read that out of the section. We won't take time to do that, but I will assure you, you will get thoroughly confused as to keeping track of what's pure and what's not. They had a hierarchy of what was pure, and if you attained to the highest level of purification, then you were of the highest sect of the Pharisees. And that's why when Paul says among the Pharisees, because concerning the law of Pharisee, it really displays about what kind of person he was in the religion of the Jews. And so here are 2 people in stark contrast as far as socially accepted. And Jesus begins to teach them. But let's look, before we get into, let's do some more background. Let's get into about the imagery of the sheep and the shepherd. This is not the only place this imagery is used. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 34. Ezekiel 34. Ezekiel 34, beginning in verse 1. Ezekiel was taken into captivity by Babylon in 597 BC. He was a contemporary of Daniel and of Jeremiah. It was in 586 that Jerusalem was finally destroyed. But Ezekiel chapter 34, God rebukes the shepherds of Israel. God rebukes the shepherds. And we have a small outline here. In verses 1 through 10, God has something against the shepherds. He says, beginning in verse 1, "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, Thus says the Lord God, Ah, shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and they became food for the wild beasts. My sheep were scattered, they wandered over all the mountains, and on every high hill my sheep were scattered over the face of the earth, with no one to search or to seek after them." The shepherds of Israel were the religious leaders of the day. What were they supposed to do with the house of Israel? To feed them, to clothe them, to look after the sheep. And the metaphor there is to see to the spiritual needs of the people, to guide them. And they were not doing that. They were not fulfilling that task. And so in verses 7 through 10, there are some consequences for that. God says, "I will acquire," in verse 10, "Thus says the Lord, Behold, I am against the shepherds, and I will require my sheep at their hand, and I will put a stop to the feeding of the sheep." But the flip side is in verse 11 through 24, where God says, "I will take care of my sheep." Even if those who he had put in place to shepherd the flock would not do it, God said, "I will take care of my sheep." Look in verses 11 through 16. God said, "I'm going to rescue my sheep." He says, "Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I myself will search for my sheep, and I will seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock when he is among the sheep that have been scattered, so will I seek out my sheep, and I will rescue them from all places that have been scattered in the day of clouds and thick darkness." And he goes on to say, "I will bind where they need to be bound, and I will feed them, and I'll take care of them. I'll lead them to good pasture," he goes on to say. He said in verse 16, "I will seek the lost, I'll bring back the strayed." God said, "I'll take care of my sheep." Yes, ma'am. Sounds like that, doesn't it? And we'll get to some more application in just a minute. But he's saying, I'm going to take care of the ones who have gone astray. I will take care of my people. And we're going to talk about some application of that, of Jesus as a shepherd, in just a minute. We're getting there. I know some of you are saying, I recognize that passage. We're getting there in just a second. But how many of you have ever lost something that you have tried to find desperately and could not find it? Okay, Bonnie's telephone. Okay, Baker found it. All right, the rescuer. The remote control. It is too much of a burden to go to the TV and turn on. How about your car keys 5 minutes before it's time to leave to go to work? Been there before? Yeah. And when you finally found that object that you have been trying to find, and it's just like, I finally found it. I found it. There's that relief. There's that relief. How about God for people who he has provided for hundreds of years? Hundreds of years I've provided for these people. And the people that I put in place to take care of them aren't doing the job. And I've got to call them back. Let's look at what he says about calling them back. In verse 17, he speaks to his flock. He says, "As for you, my flock, thus says the Lord God, Behold, I judge between the sheep and the sheep, between rams and male goats." He says, there are those, even the sheep among the sheep, who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I'll judge between those. I will be the judge. And skip down to verse 20. "Therefore, thus says the Lord God to them, Behold, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you push with side and shoulder and thrust at all the weak with your horns, till you have scattered them abroad. I will rescue my flock. They shall no longer be a prey. And I will judge between sheep and sheep, and I will set them up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. And he shall feed them with, and be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David shall be prince among them. I am the Lord, I have spoken. Who is he talking about here? Jesus. It's coming. There's a shepherd coming. And as we look and we talk about Jesus the shepherd, look in Matthew. Somebody turn to Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. Matthew chapter 9, verse 36, and I need somebody else to turn to Mark 6:34. Mark 6:34. All right, whoever has Matthew 9:36, please read it for us.
When he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them because they fainted and were scattered abroad as having sheep no shepherd.
All right, Mark 6:34.
And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things.
All right. Same passage that gives us some information about how he treated the situation. But Jesus was a shepherd. Jesus was that shepherd, that servant David, the prince among the sheep, who he would send to call back. Matthew 9:36 and Mark 6:34, he could see what others could not, and he had a heart to make provisions for the people. He saw the people as a sheep without a shepherd. Who were supposed to be the shepherds in that time?
The Levites,
The Levites, the tribe of Levi. What about these Pharisees who said they're righteous and teaching a righteousness of their own? Should they have been shepherds? Were they? Christ called them whitewashed tombs. They weren't giving anybody any guidance. They could hardly guide themselves. As a blind leads the blind. I've heard that somewhere. Jesus had the courage. Look at John chapter 10. John gives us those I am statements, about Christ. In John chapter 10, verses 7 through 16, we have those concerning the sheep. He says in John chapter 10, beginning in verse 7, so Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief only comes to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand, or a hireling, as some versions say, and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees a wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. What's he alluding to? I lay down my life for the sheep. It's crucifixion, right? The sacrifice. He is that sacrificial lamb. But he's also the door, that one that protects the sheep when they're enclosed in the cage, in the embankment. But he's also the one who is a shepherd. I am the good shepherd. There are hirelings out there who are running off whenever opposition comes, but he has the courage to stand and take care of those who nobody else will. Sorry, it's been a wrong day. We had people come today, or an individual come to the building today who wanted help. And I've been studying, this and getting ready, and all the phones have been ringing off the hook. And June knows she left me. She abandoned me in my time of need. But one came up and he wanted help. He wanted to use the building. He was a member of a denominational group, but wanted to use the building for whatever need. And I said, well, we don't see eye to eye on some things. But, in the back of my mind is like, I could just, get rid of him and just pawn it off on one of the deacons. Call this guy the involvement deacon, or just call somebody else. But in the back of my mind is like, well, he probably gets that from other people. just thrown away. I said, well, we don't see eye to eye on things. Let's talk about what we don't see eye to eye on. We're standing right there in front of the welcome the visitor thing, so I gave him lots of cards and said, let's talk about it sometime. That's not to say anything about me. I don't know that I would have thought about it necessarily if I hadn't really had it in my head about this, but aren't there those marginalized out there that nobody really cares for, nobody takes care of? And it takes courage to love them. Because once you do, people say, well, how can you open your home to that person? How can you open your home to that person? That's exactly right. Do unto the least of these, my children. I should have called June, that's right. June, there's a guy over here. But he had the strength to love those nobody else would. And sometimes we don't have the strength. Sometimes we're too busy, right? I'm too busy. Too busy to do that. I've got to be somewhere. Got to be somewhere. Or, that's really going to involve a lot of my time. And I'm talking to myself, brothers and sisters. We all struggle with that aspect of just how far, how involved in people's lives am I going to get in order to help them? How far did Christ go? All the way. Fully committed, right? He didn't run away. The wolf was coming. He didn't run away. And so when we talk about the shepherd, Christ the shepherd, what kind of application are we going to make? Here's a lost sheep, and I've flown through my material faster than I meant to. But here is the parable of the shepherd. Look again. Now that we have that as our background, here's a background in the parable of the lost sheep. Here's Jesus. Here's an image of the shepherd, of Christ the shepherd. Here's the image we have of the publicans, and then we have, or the tax collectors and publicans and the sinners, and then we have on the other side the Pharisees. Both sitting there, both listening to the same parable. And when we know about Christ and how He's interacted with people, how He's gone to the people nobody else would go to, He's talked to those who nobody else would. Let's answer these questions together. Who was Jesus trying to teach? Those that were lost. What does He talk about in the parable? The one lost, that lost sheep. And then there's the 99 that are still there. Can we identify who was a lost sheep in this parable? That's right. The one who needs to hear it. The one who's out there astray. Here is the tax collector sitting there listening to this parable. Who might he think he is? Who do you think he is? Does he think I'm the lost sheep? They know that nobody likes them. When nobody likes you in a room, is it kind of obvious that nobody likes you? There's that awkward silence every once in a while. So they knew that nobody liked them. Rome even didn't know what to do with them. Nero thought about totally doing away with the whole system. That was like maybe the one good thing Nero ever thought about doing. He thought about doing away with the whole system, but the Republicans wouldn't let him do that. The Senate wouldn't let him do that. Sorry. The Republic, the Senate would not allow him to do that. So they knew nobody liked him. And so here he is, Jesus talking to them about this lost sheep. This lost sheep. And he's sitting with them. Now, who were the 90 and 9? Who were the 90 and 9? What's that? Those Pharisees, right? Could they be considered the 99? They're sitting there, hey, we're righteous. We know what we're supposed to be doing. And they think God really likes what I'm doing. God really likes seeing me be so righteous. What did they... Go ahead. Well, in their own... It was self-righteousness. It was their own righteousness. But they thought God likes what I'm doing.
They didn't consider themselves as sinners either.
No, they did not. No, they did not. Yes, they were. There's another parable for them. But on this occasion, they thought, well, here we are, the 99, and look at what we're doing. Is God, in this parable, is God looking at numbers? Is God playing the numbers game? Who was rejoiced more over? In heaven, who was rejoicing over? The one that was lost that came back. Over 99 who didn't. Who were there, who were already there. There's more rejoicing in heaven over one that comes back. So is God in the numbers game? Well, I don't know if I can really do that because, I might only get one. God's really not about numbers, is He? We play the ratio game maybe. We're really about numbers right now, especially when we're trying to fill up a gas tank. Do I really need to go that far? Because I have to count that cost. Who was He trying to teach? What was He trying to teach? It's y'all's turn to talk now. What was He trying to teach? Follow Him. He cares. The shepherd cares for those, even the one. Even the one. Love? Love for that sheep? What was the response? What happened when they came back? What did the shepherd do when he came back with the sheep? He rejoiced. When he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Can we rejoice when a sheep comes home? When somebody decides, I'm going to come forward and I'm going to say, I've been gone. I've not been doing what I was supposed to be doing. Can we rejoice and be happy that they've come back? There's another parable in this chapter, right? There's another parable in this chapter. And there's a certain brother who wasn't necessarily happy that one brother came back. Have we ever been in that situation? Oh, here they come again. Here they come again. We better not. We better not. Not have the heart, not if we're trying to be like Christ and have the Christ mindset about the lost, about those who need to come back, need to come home. We need to have the attitude and rejoice that they've come back. Maybe they're going to have to deal with sin. There's some things they're going to deal with. There's some consequences of some decisions they've made, yes. But are we happy they're back? We're happy with their back. There is rejoicing. All right, so they heard this parable. What impact could it have had on those who heard it? Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. When we read those passages before, Jesus saw the multitude, and He had what for them? Compassion. Compassion. And it's hard to have compassion because we get jaded. I think, me personally anyway, I'm just speaking for myself and I'll project it on you as well. We get jaded about, I've tried to do the right thing and it didn't work out and they just took me or whatever. And we get jaded and we get hard about being compassionate for people, and it takes time. I have to open my heart to individuals. Are we going to get burnt from time to time? Yeah, we are. Because there will be people who take advantage of that. Yes, sir. Yeah.
He's going to bless you for sowing.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily that the person believes or does whatever. He's going to bless you for sowing.
Yep. We're supposed to do it. We're commanded to do it. A slave is given a task. Does the master ever, well, how does that make you feel that you have to do this task? Do you think that happened very often? No. And we talk about serving our master. Christ has said, you need to go. There are people out there who need to know. You need to be a Christian. You need to have compassion on people. You need to have a tender heart. I didn't ask you if you liked it. Did your parents ever say that to you? Mine did. I didn't ask you if you liked it. I just want you to do it. So we need to make sure that we have that same kind of heart, the same kind of heart that the shepherd has, the master shepherd has, for the sheep. They need to know that. What impact would it have if I'm compassionate for others? Maybe not for the person that I'm compassionate towards, but maybe those who saw me. What about your children who see you have a heart of compassion to everybody? Do you think that's going to have an impact on how they're growing up, right? How about just the people here at church, the children here at church? What about the person across the street that saw you do that good deed for somebody? People you wouldn't even think would see you do something. Would come up to you saying, I appreciate what you've done. Or maybe nothing at all. But there is an impact on those who heard. Obviously the people who Jesus was sitting with, it had an impact on them, because here's somebody who is going to take time to talk to me when nobody else will. Here's somebody who is going to teach me. Here's somebody who's going to be with me, spend time with me when nobody else will. Jesus was instructing them. He taught them. What's that? There are things that we need to do in visiting those who maybe not don't get those kind of visits. It made an impact on their lives. Now the Pharisee, the flip side of that, is it's almost a slap in their face. How can you say that this person who is impure according to our standards is worth the time and effort? Everyone's worth. We talked about that last time I taught class, I think. Everyone is worth something because we were all bought with the same price. But it wasn't a concept that they really grasped, and even still after Christ, that they didn't really grasp that concept. But everybody is worth the same price, but not in their minds. And this system that they'd set up, not in their minds. And we are guilty. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know why, but I've always stuck with I always defend the underdog.
Yep. It's always nice in those playoff football games when you really don't have a dog in the fight to root for the underdog, right? But in a situation here in this occasion, sometimes we're guilty of maybe putting up this standard of who we can talk to and who we don't talk to. Are we ever guilty of that? Guilty of saying, well, I don't know that I can really talk to them, or I know they're not going to accept it. I mean, just look at the way they're dressed. They're not gonna come to Christ. Yes, ma'am.
The Bible talks about if you love those who love you, what will you gain from that?
Yeah. It's a nice environment when you just hang out with the people that like you and you like each other. And but what about going beyond? Jesus went beyond what was socially accepted, and he went and had the courage to love those nobody else would love. And so when we talk about the parable of the lost sheep, there is a lot you can get when you go to the background of what's going on here. Look at socially the people Christ is dealing with. Nobody likes them. And the publicans are supposed to be this, shining star of righteousness. And they are not. You go to the parable of the lost coin, the same kind of rejoicing for those finding that which is lost. It's not the same when you have money and you find, $5 in your pocket after it comes out of the dryer. That's not the same because you never knew you lost it, right? That's just found money. But what about a situation where that's all you have is this coin and you search desperately to find it? And the parable lost the prodigal son. I don't know how many sermons have been taught on that subject. But Luke chapter 15, the three lost. The three lost. Giving value to something that was lost, giving value to something that nobody else would. And Christ was the one to do that. Do you have any questions or comments at this time about? Yes, ma'am.
One more thing. I find that if I go see someone who's shut in or sick, sometimes I'll try to pat them on the hand or the gift of touch. Because that's what Jesus did. He touched the leper.
That's right. The leper. That's interesting you brought that up.
Whether it be a handshake or a pat on the back or massaging.
Yeah. It's a situation where there are those who don't get the kind of contact that others that they would want to have. And the leper was definitely that individual in the time of Christ. You know, he was not one who people invited over to parties. But Christ is one that saw them. So encouraging us to have the eyes and heart and the courage of the shepherd like Christ to look for that lost sheep, to see the person that nobody else would, and be able to take care of them. Each one of us has inroads to people's hearts that we don't realize. And we need to make sure that we're watching out for our influence in that area. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.